I was raised in Hopkins, Minnesota, kind of a suburb of Minneapolis, and I attended the First Baptist Church of Hopkins, tiny, tiny church. If we had this many members on a Sunday morning, it was a big congregation. But we sang many of those wonderful old songs that I know many of you also know, and one of them is Trust and Obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. And those words describe my mother. Lydia Fleming trusted and obeyed God all her life. She was born in Świngnary, Poland. And I thought, what? We're supposedly Germans. What are we doing in Poland? Well, I'm finding more things out as we travel back to Germany. I had a great-great-grandfather from the Netherlands, and he was a Baptist pastor. And evidently there was some problems with religion at that time, and a whole group of these people settled in Poland. Because I often wondered, none of us could speak a word of Polish or understand it. So this community around Świngnary, if you know anything about Poland, where the capital of Warsaw is here, if you come down just a little bit, here's actually where we were, if this is the map of Poland. She was born to Friedrich Wilhelm Fleming and Caroline, my grandparents, my Großvater and Großmutter. And Caroline was spelled with a K. I love that. They were farmers, and we found out later that he was quite a well-to-do farmer. When the old homestead was destroyed, they pulled up the floorboards of this farmhouse and found many, many jewels, coins, probably close to $1 million worth, that had been hidden under the floorboards. Now, he was wealthy enough to, take his 3 sons that he had and educate them well. Now, the women, of course, were like the women of the day. They barely had, the minimum education. And people have always told me that probably of the whole family my mother was the brightest, and she should have been the one that should have gone to college. I just wanted to mention June 4th, 1919, if none of you know that date, but that is the centennial of the suffrage movement here in the United States, and we all get to vote. So we've come a long way. Now, my father, Adolf Harward, was a poor man. His father had died in, I think, World War I. His brother had also passed away, and he wasn't there taking care of his mother until she passed away. Now, Daddy decided, in his 20s, it's time to get married. He knew the Fleming family had 2 daughters that were eligible for marriage. So he went and talked to my Großvater and said, you know what, I'd really like to marry Teresa Fleming. Well, Tante Teresa said, I've got a young man that I am involved with, and I don't want Adolf. And then Großvater said, hey, listen, my eldest daughter has to marry first. So, it's either her or none. Well, Dad said, okay, whatever. Lots of love in that one. So he married my mother, Lydia, and they proceeded to have 2 children, Felix and Max. Well, my daddy was a hard worker, and Dwayne can attest to this, that he always had a job. And he worked for other farmers and, tried to provide for his family. But he was determined to have his own land and his own farm. So we had relatives in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And they wrote and said, you know what, there's work here. This is in the 30s when life was tough all over. And so Daddy said, I'll come. He took off for 5 years. 5 years he went to Canada and worked. Meanwhile, my mother took care of her family. Her mother had died, my grandmother had died. And so she took care of the younger siblings still in the household. Well, after 5 years, Daddy wrote and said, I'm really liking Canada. I think we could really have a good home here. Can I send for you? Will you come? And she said, I can't. I have this obligation to my father. I have this obligation to my siblings. She didn't come. So Daddy came home. Well, he bought a farm. He had enough money saved, and my daddy can save, let me tell you. And, life was good. They proceeded to have 3 more children, all girls, Helga, Ilza, and Irene. Irene actually was the middle one, Arena, and she passed away, or she died as an infant. But Helga and Elsie, of course, were living. And so, like I said, things seemed to be doing very well. Now, here's Poland. I guess if you're looking at the map, here's Poland, here's Russia, here's Germany. And of course, Hitler was on a rampage. And that eventually affected us. He invaded Poland September 1st, 1939. And that was the start of the war. Because after his invasion, then England, or Britain, and all of her Commonwealth came into the war, and also France. Of course, Britain had like South Africa, Australia, India, so there was a lot of countries already involved. They said that World War II, from 1939 to 1945, was the most widespread war ever. It included 30 countries, and it was the deadliest war in history. They estimate between 50 and 80 million people died in this war. So I was trying to put my head around that. You know how you do with figures. If you take the population of Texas, California, New York, my home state of Minnesota, and all of us in Oklahoma, and killed us all. That is how many people died that they know of, or might, there may be so many more, but that is the number that we're talking about. Well, Hitler came from one end, Russia came from the other into Poland, so it was kind of split in the middle. When Hitler came, he decided, Germans, hello, more people to draft into the military. Well, my brother Felix was just old enough, and my father was just young enough. So both of them were drafted. My father went into the Navy. Now, as you remember, I also had a brother, Max, but he died from typhoid when he was 12. So he was no longer alive at this time. We had all these tanks and people coming into Poland, and eventually they needed where we were living. So my mother and her sister-in-law moved in together. And my mother never had been healthy, let me put it that way. And so she was more the caregiver of the children at home, while my Tante Berta, my Aunt Berta, and my Tante Teresa would go out looking for food to provide for our family. And it kind of reminds me of that story of Ruth and Naomi in the Bible, that gleaming the fields. Meanwhile, my father ended up, he was easily captured, probably gave himself up, and he spent the war years in England. And so, that was a blessing for him. We stayed in Schwingnari, and then they came and said, you know what, we need your home, we need your food, we need whatever you have to feed these armies. So we're going to transport your family to Zaedorf. Well, Zaedorf, okay. We're in Poland. We're way up here to the Baltic Sea by the Netherlands. In Germany is Zaedorf. So they put us on some army trucks, and eventually we ended on a train. Now, I'm I would say about somewhere between 12 and 15 months old, because I still had a bottle at that time. When we got on the train, there was a German soldier, and, And my sisters, they say, it was because of you, Ruth. It was because of you that we caught his attention, because I was just, this little girl. He said, I have a little girl like this at home, and I wish the war was over so I could go home and see my family. And he got to talking to my mother, and he says, well, where are you all going? She said, well, we're going to Zaydorf. He goes, you're not going to Zaydorf on this train. This train is going to Auschwitz, and you have to get off. Here's God. Isn't God just in all things? So he took us off this train, took us to the correct train so that we could end up in Zaydorf. Here was this family. We stayed in Zaydorf from about 1945 to 1947, about 2 years. Two things I remember about Zaydorf. You can imagine, I was 2 to 3 years old. One was that I got typhus. Now, there's typhoid and there's typhus. And typhus, I have to put this in kind of small, I have to read this, is an infectious disease characterized by a purple rash, headaches, fever, delirium, and historically a cause of high mortality during wars and famines, transmitted by lice, ticks, mites, and rat fleas. So our living conditions weren't the best. Well, according to my sisters, now I was too young, they told me that with a horse and a wagon, they took us to Demene, the nearest city, and Dwayne and I, my sister still lives up there, Dwayne and I went to visit, and the hospital's still standing, so I have a picture of me standing in front of this hospital. But I remember being in this hospital. First of all, I'd never been in a crib in my life, and they put me in a crib, and it had those wrought iron, those little bars, those tiny little bars, and they had the other crib next to me pulled really close, which probably was their first mistake, because I remember with this hand swinging through my crib into this other crib because there was a toy. Now, whether or not I ever got it, that part I don't remember, but I do remember doing this. The other memory I have of Zaydorf is that my cousin Bertel and I were too young to go to school. He is a year older than I am, and we played together. Now, we didn't have running water or electricity in this block home that we were living in, but there was a pump out front. And he and I decided, I'm thinking it might even have been me, because he's really a nice guy. We decided we need to play in this water. So here we are just pumping away. Well, we had one pair of shoes and one pair of ill-fitting shoes, and they were wet and probably our clothes. And I can still see the doorway. And in the doorway is my Tante Berta with a broom. She might have been sweeping the house out. Well, she came and she swatted. I'll never forget, she swatted me. And my cousin. Now, Bertel, bless his heart, I couldn't say Bertel, so I called him Lulu. So that was his nickname from then on. Well, the war is over, and Tante Berta's husband, my Uncle Willie, had been captured and taken to Siberia. So he spent the war years in Siberia. Well, somehow, and I don't know these stories, how he escaped, but he came home about the time the war was over. So they decided, well, whatever, and just let him stay. But he had gone through some hard times in Russia. My daddy had a much better advantage where he was. And the Holy Spirit spoke to my mother so many times in her life, and so many stories she told us about. She needed to leave this place. She needed to leave Zaydorf. And so she said to her brother, you and your family come with me, because the war was over, and although there wasn't a wall built, there was barbed wire that they were keeping people in and people out of the east and western zones, and guards. So she said, we have to leave. Well, he said, no, I can't. I've been through so much. My whole physical and mental health is just spent. We'll come later. We'll come later. So mother had money. Some of this money, evidently that my grandfather had, somehow she had some of that. She had hidden it in a hollowed out tree. And they said, if you have money, we can find someone to take care of getting you across the border. Well, she had money. So she had to do some things in the county city area, some paperwork she had to go through, and she had this money, and this man said, I will tell you the time, I'll tell you the place, and you be ready. So we packed our things, and off we were. Well, finally, it was our time to go across the border. Now, again, I have one memory, because I'm still 3.5, 4 years old, probably even less than that, and that is waiting for our time in the woods, the Black Forest, and I remember hearing the wolves, and that's the only thing I remember of all of this. Well, my sisters filled in the rest for me. We sat so long, and remember now, my mother was not well, and she was a heavy-set woman, and she had gotten some cramps. It was time for us to go, and she could not get up. Well, 2 sisters, 13 and 9, and me. Helga, my eldest one, they called her Bügelbrot, which means ironing board, because she was so thin. Because you can remember the kind of food we had, and then Elsie, she was 9 years old, was built a little more like me, a little bit not fat in the least, but she was strong. These two girls, by the grace of God, pulled my mother and me on this blanket we were sitting on across the border. Now, they also saw people being shot that were going across when it wasn't their time, when they didn't have the money. When it was our time, we had that banner of the Lord and all that she had gone through to get us across safely. So here we made it. She finally found a sugar cube, if you can imagine a sugar cube, that she was able to take. And, who knows, blood sugar, whatever problems a person can have that's not well. But this sugar cube helped her to get back up and then continue on across the border. We were immigrants, and we had to be accepted in these different towns. And I did have a copy of a postcard that meanwhile my father, there's a problem here. My dad is in England, and we are wherever in Germany. And he had written this postcard to his cousin in Minneapolis and to his sister and her husband. And it says, I have no answer from my wife, along with the rest of that. Now, he could not write in English, so I know someone else wrote this for him. But, he was looking for us. Well, after being here and there a few places in Germany, we finally ended up in Neubrunn. Now, if you look at German map, go way to the bottom. And it's the Bavarian area of Germany. And if you remember seeing The Sound of Music and the Von Trapp family, that's the area they were from, right by the Swiss border. Beautiful little city or town that we were brought to. It was 1,200 years old. It had a wall, at least the width of those 2 double doors or more, because I remember the archway coming into the city, and there were people actually living above there. And it was just a very, very old city. We were the only Protestant and one other family in this community. They were all Catholic, and they were not pleased. First of all, they didn't want an immigrant, and secondly, we weren't even Catholic. But it's funny how adaptable children are. And being the youngest, I think I'm the youngest, of course everyone's going to love me. What's not to love, you know? So I went into this community, and I'm surprised at my age how I ran around this town, and I remember running around this town. And they had a very strong dialect, very hard to understand. In German, we would say, Bitte kommen Sie da raus. They would say, Kommen auf. Well, guess who learned Kommen auf right away? I was in there with their dialect. And because of that, you know, they thought that was really precious of this little girl talking just like them. So I was immediately accepted and enjoyed it so much. My father, like I said, is in prison. And I have to just read this letter, and I think this is a letter that Reverend Reginald Baker of Mansfield Road Baptist Church of Nottingham, England, wrote for my father as he was a prisoner there. Now, he is again writing, this is dated June the 14th, 1947. And he is again writing to the family in Minneapolis, the Edson family. Dear Mr. Edson, I have promised to write to you on behalf of your uncle, Adolf Harbert, who has been coming to my church a good bit lately. He was showing me your last letter in which you said to him, which you said you intended trying to get hold of some English pounds and would send them to him. The situation is that he is not allowed to receive or even process English money. And if you send it to the camp, it would simply be confiscated and he would never see it. He asked me, therefore, if I would be willing for you to send anything addressed to him at my address, and I would pass it on to him, of course. I shall be pleased to help in this way. I see him every Sunday now, and if you care to send him a parcel through me, it will not be many days before he gets it. He asked me to say that he would very much appreciate the gift of a shirt and a pair of shoes. Adolf is perfectly fit, but very fed up with imprisonment. This is 2 years after the war. Some of us feel it is disgraceful that they are still kept in this country 2 years after the end of the war. It's nothing short of slave labor, and we feel very ashamed of our government's attitude about it all. We are doing all we can to help the men feel that they have lots of friends in this country, and I know they appreciate anything we try to do. We personally have made very good friends among the POWs. Yours sincerely, Reverend Baker. And then he has a little PS. You may wonder at our not being able to fix Adolf up with shirt and some shoes ourselves, but really, we have all got right to the end of our wardrobes. Clothes have been rationed for such a long time now, and the coupons are quite inadequate, so that we simply cannot do the kind of things that we would like for other people. Isn't it a blessing to have a man like this with the prisoners there? Well, you have to remember now, I have never met my father. I'd never seen him. And so all I know is what my mother has told me about this man who I dearly loved. And it kind of reminded me of the Bible, how we read the Bible about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And although we've never met them, we meet them in our hearts. And that's how I met my daddy. Well, Daddy's coming to Neubrunn. Oh, and I forgot to tell you one thing he always was so proud of. He goes, you know, Ruth, I was the only one in the POW camp that was allowed a sharp knife because he was a cook. So Daddy comes to Neubrunn. Okay, I can still see this. My mother and my 2 sisters are standing behind me because I am going to see him first. He came, I'm thinking in a horse and wagon because I had never seen a car at that point. So, and he came and he set down this suitcase. And he got down on his knee and he opened up his arms And this little girl came flying to him. And I still remember that. To this day, I remember that. It's kind of like, again, like Christ. He has his arms open if we will just come. And, you know, I was daddy's girl always, always. Um, it was time then for me to go to the first grade, and that's the book that you're seeing. And they told us there's only a Catholic school, and they will go to mass every day. So Daddy says, sure, why not? So here's a picture of me in the first grade. And what's funny about this picture is it says mein ersten Schultag, my first day of school. And I remember we are standing in front of the outhouse, the boys' outhouse. I remember these shoes that were too big for me. And I also remember, I have my hand up like this, I have a backpack. It was brown and it was kind of made out of particle board, which very cheap. But there you go. And I have Zepfen, which are two braids. So Daddy's family in America said, you have nothing now. You have no farm. You have nothing to, and working. Oh, I forgot to tell you one thing about this suitcase. Guess what was in this suitcase? Cigarettes. Why they gave him cigarettes? I mean, at the POW camp, and my daddy was a smoker, but he knew they would be worth like gold. So I can't remember how many he had, but he had a lot of them. And on the black market, he was able to, get us food, get us clothing. And he also worked for farmers. There was no money. There was no. They said the German mark you could use for toilet paper. It was worthless. But he worked for food. And the farmers, he had been a farmer. He could butcher. He could do all the things that they needed done. And they were glad to have him as their help. So we always had a good meals. So in 1949, then Daddy had decided to go and get our family to come to the United States. Now, this is just not a run-of-the-mill thing that you do. In 1924, the United States ended mass immigration. Before that time, if you had the money, honey, you could come, And now it's a certain amount or percentage from each country allowed in the United States each year. So you have to show, and that was the National Origins Act of 1924. And there was many, many embassies then after World War I, U.S. embassies all over the world that were built. You had to sign up at the U.S. consulate. You had to have the proof of sponsorship. You had to have a financial affidavit. You had to apply for a visa. You had to have a exit and wait transit permission. And lastly, you had to have a physical. At least we did. And it's kind of confusing because Ellis Island didn't close till 1954. And we came in 1950. So I don't know, but I think because we had the physical examination in Germany and we passed, that we didn't have to go to Ellis Island. That's the only thing I can think of. Well, here's God again, okay? We had our physicals, had the shots. Everyone passed but my mother. And, they finally just said, go. You have 3 children. We're just going to pass you anyway. There goes God again, So she was able to come with us, or we were all, or none of us would come. Here, I was on the passport with her, and Dwayne blew this up, that here's my passport picture. So, and then, of course, I have such wonderful children. My son, Stephen, my youngest son, says, I guess, Mom, you're an alien. I'm going, what? He says, yeah, look what I found on the internet. Here lists all the aliens that were on the SS America, which is the name of the ship we were on, and has all of our names, We had 8 bundles, suitcases, whatever. So there we go. I said, "Oh, thank you, Stephen." We weren't allowed to come in 49. The quota had been filled. So in 1950. But had we come in 1949, I would not have gone to the first grade. And I would not have learned to read German. Because when we came here, we wanted to learn English. So that was another God thing that he needed us there that other year. We had fun on the ship. We, as in me. My mother, very seasick. My sister Helga, very seasick. Elsie, very shy. Me, not so much. I remember that ship, and I remember having the best time. I met some American children. Now, you have to remember, I spoke no English. They spoke no German. But with kids, that's just really not a big deal. So I remember playing with them. I remember coming down the hallway, probably going somewhere or to my room, and there was a steward with a tray of fruit. And I looked at that fruit, and he stopped, and I pointed to this fruit, and he said, "Banana." I knew banana. My daddy had told me all about a banana. I'd never seen a banana or tasted a banana, but and it's pretty much the same pronunciation in German. And I just thought that was just wonderful. I got to see this banana. Well, it wasn't very long after that. There was a knock on our door, which, because we had all of our meals in our rooms because of the illness, he came with this big tray of fruit, and there were some bananas. So at the age of 6, I had my first banana. The other thing I remember so well about that ship is the last day, the last night, they had a big party. And I remember going past the dining room, and oh my gosh, there were balloons and streamers and hats. And I mean, it was a party. Of course, you've got to remember, this little girl had seen squat as far as anything like that, never seen a balloon in her life. I was thrilled. Of course, we couldn't go. We took all of our meals in our rooms. So that night, when our dinner came, they brought balloons and streamers. I mean, I was beyond thrilled. So the kindness of these people, you just have those memories in your heart for them. Well, we ended up in Hopkins, Minnesota, and I just remember my second grade teacher. Well, first of all, we got there in May, first part of May. School is out the first part of June. And they said, "Put her to school, put her in class." I couldn't speak a word of English or understand a word. But here's God again. Here is God again. Put me in that first grade class because I made friends. And there was my friend Mary Claire, which we recently went to visit last year. She lives in Kansas. And her sisters and her friends. Open arm acceptance of this little immigrant girl. And because I got to know her during those few weeks of school, then we became friends during the summer. She lived several blocks from my house, and I probably would never have met her, that far away from my home. But playing together, and these children are so great. They accepted me and taught me English because they were going to let me go back to the first grade again because of the fact I didn't speak English. But I learned enough in that summer that they put me right into second grade. And that's where my second grade teacher, I couldn't read English, so she stayed after school. After school with me and taught me how to read. And that's dedication. Then the biggest thing in my life happened. They took our class to the library. Oh my word. You don't even want to ask Dwayne how much I read. All these books, and we were allowed to check them out, and I got to take it home and I got to read these books. And the love of reading has been with me always. That little first grade book, you can see how much I cherished it. Not because I didn't realize it was going to be that important to me later, but it was a book. And that's why I hung on to it so long. So, here we were. I went to school, high school, attended the University of Minnesota. met Dwayne. We had our 3 children, lived over there on Sooner Court, off of Sooner Road here in Edmond at this time. When lo and behold, and like Paul Harvey said, this is the rest of the story. Did you know he was from Tulsa? I thought that was interesting. And also, in 1989, the Berlin Wall came down so that any and all people that were in the East Zone were allowed to travel. But I got this letter, and it's from Adolf Hohertz, and he's in Osterkappeln, Germany, dated November 4th, 1993. And it was funny, we were talking about this letter when we were with our son recently. He goes, Mama, I remember when you got this letter. And he has, here he says, my sister Juliana had guests from East Germany, 2 ladies. Both are friends for many years. Her name is Bertha Fleming, born Schade. Remember Tante Bertha, my Tante Bertha. Born in 1908, and I don't know what Poland where she was born. This is the beginning of my unusual letter. This lady is your real mother. She lives in East Germany, and for her age, she is in very good shape. Your father, William Fleming, that's Uncle Willie that came from Russia, when he was a POW in Russia, was killed by a car accident on the way from Dusseldorf. They have tried to get in touch with you for many years. When I say they, so it means you have 1 more sister and 3 brothers named Gisela, Hilmer, Bertel, and Walter. And Bertel was my one that was a year older than I am that I call Lulu. You are the youngest of the family. Your brothers and sisters are all married and honest, hard-working men and women. They live in or near the city of Demmin, where I had been hospitalized, and in East Germany and Berlin. So I'm going, what the heck? What a surprise. So I proceeded to call my sister, Helga, who lives in Minneapolis. I said, Helga, what's the deal? She goes, yeah, that's right. I'm going, she said, our mother Lydia, was the one that took care of me from birth on. For whatever reason, I don't know, but it was. And she told her brother, when she was going to cross over from east to west, she's not leaving without me. So he said, well, if you take her, it's kind of like we have her. So she had gone, when I told you she had to do some paperwork, somehow got some papers, adoption papers, something legal to bring along with her. And then she told the family, you will never tell her that she is not my daughter, because she is my daughter, and I don't want her to ever think otherwise. So everyone kept that promise. I thought, whoa, that's, even my stepmother, she eventually knew everything but me. So we were able to go in, I think, 1997. 93 is when I got this letter, and in 1997, Dwayne and I were able to go visit. Now, you've got to go back again. I went to the 1st grade, remember, and I learned to read German. And we didn't speak German that much in our family because we were all trying to learn English. So, but I still remembered to speak, because none of them can speak English. My mother, my brothers and sisters. After the Berlin Wall came down, they were more free of learning English in the classrooms, and now my nieces and nephews are fine. But so we went to visit and got to meet them, and she passed away a few years after that. But it was still very strange. And my sister said, well, how do you feel about this? I said, Helga, you have been my sister all my life. 1 letter is not going to change anything. 1 letter is not going to change the love that my mother had for me. And she was only here 2 years in America, and in 1952, she passed away. I said, when I say mother, it's Lydia. And So, and I have, this is kind of this was a picture taken in Poland. These are my actual brothers and sisters. And I'll leave these up here if you want to look at it. It's kind of hard to see. Dwayne blew it up a little bit. And then this is us today. I put us all in the same order. And the one to the right of me is Lulu. And when I met him, I said, "Do you remember me calling you Lulu?" He said, "Yes, I do." So I just want to say I came from Schwingnari to Edmond, and it was 6,461 miles. And I can honestly say that God was with me and my family every step of the way.